Welcome, everybody. I'm Susan Spieler. I'm the coordinator of the New York City Grassroots Alliance. The New York City Grassroots Alliance is a group of grassroots groups that care a lot about climate issues, environmental issues, and social justice issues. One of our claims to fame in the past was that we were very instrumental in getting Governor Cuomo to ban fracking in New York State, which I can tell you is no small fight, let me tell you. And it really educated me on how much you have to speak up if you want something to happen. You really do, because we showed up, every time he showed up in New York, we were there. We were with signs and chanting and telling him how we felt and that we wanted him to ban fracking in New York State. And he waited till the very last minute. I don't remember exactly what the last minute was at the time, but we didn't know what he was going to do, and then he finally did. However, as you may know, some of you, we have frack gas coming into New York State. So even though he banned the actual act of drilling for gas, frack drilling, he did that, like he kept to his word in that way, but then he let pipelines in with frack gas from other states. And not only pipelines, but all sorts of fossil fuel infrastructure. So if you're interested in that stuff, we can direct you to some of our member groups that are working on these issues. And in the beginning of our organization several years ago, we were all working on that because that's how the group started. The Grassroots Alliance was first founded because groups got together and said, let's work on this together. And that solidarity is what got it accomplished. So that's important to understand. If you want to get anything done, you have to work with a lot of people. You have to persist like crazy. And you have to support each other. And so recently, for a long time, I was very interested in the topic that we're dealing with now. And I thought we should do some events about food, agriculture, and climate change, like what the relationship between those three things is. And it turns out, in my experience, which is not about food, agriculture, and climate change. My background is as a clinical psychologist, but I became interested in this and I started reading about it and watching movies about it and just gathering knowledge. And I said, this is a really great issue to be focused on. So far we've had this is our third event on that topic, and the one before that was about pesticides and helping a kindergarten teacher in New York City get a ban on pesticides. She hasn't achieved it. We decided to try to help her, but we had a great event about it in November, early November. We meet once a month on the first Mondays, and the way to find out about future events is to look on the meetup, our meetup, which is NYC Grassroots Alliance. Does everybody know how to look that up on a meetup? If you don't, let me know. Don't be embarrassed. So I want to announce that we have a special guest who hopefully will no longer be a guest because we're very happy that she's here and hopefully she'll be a regular. So Jennifer Greer, raise your hand, Jennifer. Jennifer Greer works for Letitia James, who is, does anybody know who that is?
Yeah.
Yep, the public advocate of New York City, who is like second in command to the mayor, right?
Yes.
Yes. So we're very honored that they have made a commitment to send Jennifer here regularly at all of our meetings in the future. That's a real honor. And that should be able to help us achieve things, and we should be able to help them achieve things. So that's a really good thing to have a collaboration like that. And one of the things that Letitia James did recently that was very, very helpful was that she held a big, what are we going to call? You know what I'm talking about. I can blanking on the word. The public hearing about climate change. So anybody who wanted to testify could submit testimony and speak there if there was time. And it was very good. And I think she asked really great questions of the people who spoke so that she could be more educated and informed. And she seemed very interested in learning more about it because the activist community had held several important events in New York to show the importance to all of us of things like divestment from the fossil fuel industry, where she came, and she and Scott Stringer, the controller of New York City, that we wanted that. And she saw that we wanted that because we showed up again in large numbers and spoke about it. So then she came and held that public hearing and responded. So that's wonderful. And hopefully she'll be around for a while politically, and we can help her stay around, you know? So just wanted to give you a little background. So today, we're gonna have our third event about food, agriculture, and climate change. And I'm very excited because I've talked to all the speakers we have here before today, and they're all terrific. They're all doing different things, so we'll have to see how it all connects and learn from them all. You have plenty to learn. And I know that some of you in the audience are farmers. Raise your hand if you're a farmer. Nuka, and I forgot your name. What's your name again?
Yeah.
No, I know
Kevin.
your name.
Kevin.
Kevin. Okay, so they obviously have been here before, and they learned, they thought it was worth coming back. So I guess we're covering material that's interesting for you guys enough to warrant coming back, and that's great. Okay, so I'll just say a little quick thing about me and why this topic is of interest. I've never been a gardener, I've never been a farmer, but I became involved with a CSA on the Upper West Side, and I'll tell you what that is for those who don't know what that is. And I realized it's really important to support CSAs. So probably some of you don't know what a CSA is, right? Just admit it, okay? I'll assume it, okay? CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And what it means is a group of people it's like a membership group. You join a CSA, and what you're doing is you're contributing to support a local farmer or a few farmers, and you get produce from that farmer or farmers weekly in a central location. You come and you volunteer. One of the obligations for this is to volunteer, because who's going to run it? It's all of us. It becomes a community effort. And so I've been running a CSA for 7 years, and I know our farmers really well because we really have bonded. It's more than just, you don't know who's running your supermarket in as intimate a way as I know my farm family. And it really is very touching to know them and what their struggles are. And so I really strongly encourage you, if you've never belonged to one, to consider joining one. And what you get depends on what the CSA is providing, but mine is all very, very fresh, pesticide-free produce, vegetables. They're beautiful, they're plentiful, and one of our speakers here, there you are, one of our speakers, Erika, works for an organization called Westside Campaign Against Hunger, and that organization is the organization we donate our surplus to. So when our members fail to pick up their vegetables once in a while, we give it to them, and they do things with it that she will explain, when we get into that. So, okay, so anything else you would like to ask before we start? Okay, one other thing that I want to tell you is we wouldn't be here today if not for the New York Society for Ethical Culture, which is allowing us to use space here. So I just want to tell you a little about them and what they do, in case you don't know, because that's my commitment to supporting them. So, this space is provided by them, and if you don't know what they do, Ethical Culture is a humanist community dedicated to ethical living and promoting ethical action on issues such as social justice and environmental stewardship. There are many interesting programs and events here, usually every day, a lot of which you might like. And we encourage everyone here to stop by the lobby on your way out and pick up some Ethical Outlook newsletters and flyers and things to find out more about what goes on here. And also you can look things up on their website, ethical.nyc. And I've been to several of the events that they host on Sunday mornings, and they're very interesting, get great speakers, so something to consider. Okay, so now we're going to get started, and our first speaker is going to be Alexis Baden-Mayer, who is an attorney, and she's the political director of Organic Consumers Association. Their organization is based in Minnesota, and they do great things, and you'll learn about it today. And she is based in Washington, so we're honored to have her come from Washington for this event. And being the policy director of that organization means that she's connected with the political scene in Washington and can tell us what she knows about all of that. Alexis is going to speak first, and after that we're going to hear from Erika Freund, which is Erika right there, and she works for Westside Campaign Against Hunger, and we'll hear more about her role. And then we'll hear from Sharon Kimmelman, who is a community gardener and teaches gardening and healthy eating to young children through a public school on the Upper West Side. And we're going to find a way to connect all those dots, so bear with us.
I added my email here so that you can get in touch with me after our presentation. I really want to continue working with this group here in New York. I love coming up to New York from DC, so I'm available anytime, and I hope that this is the beginning of a good working relationship between our organizations. So I wanted to try to encapsulate all of the subjects that we're going to cover tonight. And unfortunately, the easy way to do that is to talk about what's going wrong in our food system right now. So we have a tremendous amount of hunger and malnutrition. 1 in 8 Americans don't get enough calories, but 85% of us, and I was astounded by this figure, 85% of us aren't getting enough nutrients, which is different than calories, and I'll explain that further later on. At the same time that we have this crisis in our food system where we're not producing as a nation enough healthy food, we also are losing farms and losing farmers and even losing our soil. So in this country, farmers actually commit suicide twice as often as our military veterans. And we know what horrible pain our military veterans are in. So this, you can sense from that how serious the crisis facing our farmers is. And each year, we're losing thousands of farms. Between 2015 and 2016, we lost 8,000 farms in this country, and we're also losing millions of acres of farmland to development and land use changes. And then on a global scale, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says that by 2075, in 60 years, well, from the year they announced this, it was the year of the soil in 2015.
The year of what?
The year of the soils.
Soil?
Yes, the United Nations declared a year of the soil because soil is so important, and it is a rapidly vanishing natural resource.
How many of you have been aware of how important soil is? I didn't know this until I started doing these events. So a lot of you do know. That's great. Okay.
Yeah, it definitely all comes down to the soil. And then if those two problems weren't enough, and they are each individually problems that we would have to address as a culture, we also obviously are facing climate change at the same time. And climate change is impacting our food system, but it's also one of the causes, the food system is one of the causes of climate change. And there, some estimates of agriculture's greenhouse gas emissions put it down around 12% or 14%, but that's only looking at what happens on the farm. But when you start with the land use changes, cutting down the forests, and then you go all the way to transportation, refrigeration, and processing, you can estimate that it may be as much as 57% of global greenhouse gases. So our food system might be more than half of the greenhouse gases that are causing climate change. But and also we're seeing this impact that climate change will have on the food system at the same time. So the loss of soil is going to be exacerbated by the droughts and the floods. We're going to see reduced yields, and this is happening in the United States and on a global scale. We're already seeing reduced yields, increased food prices, and migration driven by climate change, which is forcing farmers off of their land and putting farmland out of production. So I'm going to try to keep my talk short, but I'll flip quickly through the supporting documentation of this situation. So I've already talked about the number of food insecure families. Okay, this is where it gets interesting because the fact that some of us don't get enough calories, but almost all of us don't get enough nutrition. And this is resulting in about half of Americans having one or more chronic, preventable diet-related diseases. And this is according to our health department and in their report on what the dietary guidelines should be. So this is where it comes down to it. This is why we're not getting the nutrition. We're not eating healthy food. So the USDA says we should have 1.5 to 2 cups of fruit every day. But 87% of us don't eat that much fruit. It seems like a tiny amount to me, but most of us aren't eating that. For vegetables, we should have 2 to 3 cups, but 91% of us don't eat 2 to 3 cups of vegetables every day. And this is taking a toll on our health. So about 85% of us don't get the recommended daily intake of the most important nutrients that we need for proper physical and mental development. And this is taking a toll on the health of our children. So there are vitamins that our kids aren't getting, and this is resulting in compromised immune systems, stunted physical growth, reduced mental ability, chronic disease, and even death. This is the source of our health crisis. We are not getting enough healthy food. That means we don't have the nutrition that we need to be healthy. So why, is it just because we don't feel like eating fruits and vegetables? Or is there something wrong with our entire food system? As it turns out, there is only 1.7 cups of vegetables available to us if we split it up evenly. And I'm not just talking about the food that's grown in the United States. The food that is grown in the United States plus the food we import. There is only 1.7 cups of vegetables per day when you distribute that. That's pretty shocking, isn't it? We're just not producing or even importing enough healthy food for each of us. And of course, a lot of our food gets wasted. And we'll talk about solutions to that issue. But we waste enough food to feed 25 million Americans. But notice that figure doesn't add up to the number of Americans who are hungry, because that figure was over 40 million. So my suspicion, and I haven't been able to verify this with anyone else writing on the subject, like, do we actually even have enough food to eat? If we have a certain amount of food that's being eaten, we have a certain amount of food that's being wasted, and the wasted food would only feed 25 million Americans, but over 40 million Americans are going hungry. So that tells me that maybe we don't even have enough food in this country to feed everybody. And so it's the entire structure of our food system, not just our food choices or our economic disposition. We have a food system that is massively foul. And just to give one example of why that might be happening, most of the corn is going to produce ethanol now. And then the other big chunk of the corn is going to feed animals in factory farms. So we have an incredibly wasteful food system. And that's, of course, wasting soil, wasting water, wasting all the resources that we need to produce food into the future. And so separately, we could address this as a major crisis, the loss of farms, farmers, and soils. I mentioned the suicide rate and the loss of farms and farmland, and then also what the United Nations is concerned about, running out of soil altogether. And then the third major topic that would be enough all by itself is climate change. This is my hometown, Alexandria, Virginia. There's the Ben & Jerry's, and we're looking at the intersection from the artist group, the Torpedo Factory. Like, this is where I grew up, my neighborhood, where I live now. And this is after Hurricane Isabel. And I'm sure you guys have images like this from Superstorm Sandy that really stick with you about the impact of climate change to your life and the places that you love and the communities that you exist in. I mean, I love this quote from Congressman Jamie Raskin. He's a Maryland congressman. He says, climate change isn't just an issue, it's the entire context in which we have to make all of our public policy decisions. And I think that's so true, especially when we're talking about food and agriculture, because climate is going to impact food and agriculture first, and it might be the most important thing we have to be impacted by climate change. So here's more stats on the contribution of agriculture to current greenhouse gas emissions. And this is how it breaks down. The food waste, the processing and transport, packing and retail, a huge chunk from land use and deforestation. And then if you just look at agricultural production, if you only look at what's happening on the farm, then that's just 11 to 15%. But it really makes more sense to include in the calculation the rest of the food supply chain. So here's the solution. The solution it starts in the soil. We have to start building soil rather than losing it. Unfortunately, there's no state in the union that is actually building soil rather than losing it, including New York. So this is a big issue that we have to tackle nationwide. But there's a way to do it. So just looking at the climate change piece. So this might get a little technical. It might seem somewhat abstract when we're talking about hunger, when we're talking about nutrition. But actually, everything comes from healthy living soil. And one way that you can measure the stamina of your soil's ability to hold water, to provide nutrition to your plants, everything comes down to how much carbon is in the soil. Now, when it comes to climate change, this is a good and bad thing because we have actually lost 660 gigatons of carbon, which translated into CO2, from the soil and from our terrestrial ecosystem. So initially when I got involved, just started as a young activist interested in climate change, we were concerned about the rainforest being cut down. And I imagine that's where our carbon is. It's in our rainforests and it's in the trees, but it's actually more so in the soil. But we've lost from our terrestrial ecosystems that much carbon. But you can actually get it back. It's a cycle. So we've got carbon in the soil, becomes carbon in the atmosphere, or carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and then through photosynthesis and plant respiration, the CO2 can actually be drawn back down and placed as stable soil carbon in the ground. And so we have this carbon cycle totally out of balance with way too much CO2 in the atmosphere, way too much in the oceans now. We're seeing ocean acidification as a problem resulting from that. But we can get our carbon cycle back in balance by growing healthy plants and growing the types of fruits and vegetables and grass-fed animals, to get that cycle back in balance. So if we did that, and using data that came from the Obama administration, their last reports that they prepared for the climate change meeting in 2016 in Morocco. So this is the data that they had at that time preparing for that meeting. So this is probably the last good data we'll see on climate change because the Trump administration, I don't think they're working too hard on this. But anyway, so the Obama administration looked at this and they said that if we got that CO2 that's left the soil back into the soil, we could reduce our atmospheric CO2 by 40 to 70 parts per million by 2100, which is exactly the amount of CO2 that has to come out of the atmosphere. It might not be enough, quite frankly, but you probably have been active in the group 350.org, and you know that 350 means the dangerous tipping point of 350 parts per million in the atmosphere. We're now around 410. So, 40 to 70 parts per million we need every last bit of that. And we need to get our soil carbon cycle back in balance. So if we do that, if you bring carbon out of the atmosphere, put it in the soil, you're not losing soil anymore, you're building soil because the carbon is the structure of the soil. And when you have more carbon in your soil, your land is more resilient to droughts and floods. The food that you produce is more nutritious. And most importantly, you're going to have farms that can have greater income and aren't going to see huge losses from climate change, hopefully. But the most important thing is what Susan led with. We have to buy food directly from farmers. That's the biggest contribution that we can make as consumers, because then they get all the money rather than having the middlemen and the big corporations, even cooperatives, that refuse to pay the farmers what it costs to produce the food. So when you go to the farmer's market and you realize, geez, this food's a lot more expensive than what I get in the grocery store, it's because the farmer's getting paid what it costs the farmer to produce the food. And we have to invest in that economic model. Otherwise, we'll see more family farms lose their land. And when we talk about the 8,000 farmers losing their land, that's not massive farmers. These are the small-scale family farms, the types of family farms that would be willing to bring food to the city, to a market or to CSA. So we really need to support those farmers. So that's the most important thing I can say. But after buying direct from a family farmer, you want to compost all of your food waste and make sure nothing is wasted, and that hungry people who don't have the income to buy food, are part of the whole economy. So,
Let me interrupt for a second. How many of you collect your food scraps and bring them somewhere to donate them for composting? Okay, great. So just keep in mind that it's not a hard thing to do, doesn't cost you any money to do it, and it's only beneficial. Okay? Yes, Sonia?
So, where do you take your food waste?
I bring mine to my local farmers market behind the Museum of Natural History. There are farmers markets all around the city, and you can look them up through Grow NYC and find out where they are and when they're there. And I think they all provide a compost station where you can donate. But it's a really easy thing to do, and we may have a speaker next time or the time after who's very into composting. And I thought this is such a boring topic a long time ago, and now I'm into this whole thing. And it's really important to pick up. Wait. We want to record what you're saying.
So I just want to mention that my last slide, and so I'm totally done, but this is my last slide, and it has the website of the international coalition that we helped to start here in New York City in 2014 when the big climate march happened. We formed this coalition along with Vandana Shiva and Hans Herren and lots of other folks in the organic movement. Andre Loy, who leads the Organic Farmers Association internationally. And our motto is to work for a healthy global ecosystem in which regenerative agriculture and land use practices cool the planet, feed the world, and promote public health, prosperity, and peace. And I would say that that is the only way to achieve these things. We must save our soil, we must keep our farmers on the land, and produce food in a regenerative way.
So I'm just going to say something that we learned at the last event about soil. We showed a film called Symphony of the Soil, and from that film I learned that we don't have a lot of cover to the minerals at the base of our earth. And the minerals at the base of our earth don't grow anything. So if the soil goes away through one reason or another, we have no food. So we all should care about this. And so in a minute, I'm going to give the mic back to Sharon, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the compost issue and how that helps cover the earth. We need to cover the mineral base, like what we think of as rock, I guess. And I'm no scientist, but I'm learning. And so we need to do something about it. And composting is a direct thing you can do about it. Because you won't be composting at home. You'll be collecting the food scraps and donating them to some place that's going to process the food scraps to turn it into compost. And compost is used to cover the earth.
Chemtrails. I know that they put the aluminum there so that the sun won't come in. You have the bad effects of bark coming off. It totally changes the ecosystems of ponds and rivers, and it's not good for the soil as well. I'm wondering your ideas on the chemtrails.
You know anything about that? No? How do you spell what you're saying?
Chemtrails. C-H-E-M, trails. You know the things you see up there?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, they call them chemtrails. They don't call them chemical trails, they just call them chemtrails. You see those things up there, and they've got all those bad ingredients in them, those horrible things there for people. But I saw a thing years ago, especially it was in Hawaii, these organic farmers, and they brought their kids up on it, and the chemtrails, how they were destroying the bark, destroying the ecosystems of the ponds and everything like that, and the soil. I mean, the bark was coming off, and then I know that they also put aluminum in there to supposedly make it so that it reflects the sun, and there's a whole lot of other absolutely horrible ingredients in it and elements and chemicals in it. So
maybe we can talk after, this coming week about more about that and distribute some information about it.
that would be great.
I guess I'm curious if you could just talk about, from the policy advocacy standpoint, who are the biggest opponents to these types of measures? Because that seemed a relatively comprehensive proposal, and I watched the presentation of it with Michael Pollan, and it addressed a lot of aspects, including like rural development, but seemed to also have no chance of going anywhere. So is that coming from the big ag lobbies? Is that coming from the Grocery Manufacturers Association? Can you talk about who those groups are?
Yeah, there's just such a huge interest that the corporations have in keeping the cost that they have to pay to the farmer minuscule. And because we have that system where the companies will not pay the farmers the cost of production, then we need the government to come in and prop up our food system with subsidies. And the subsidy schemes are incredibly complicated. The Farm Bill is a challenging piece of legislation to lobby on because it's so complex. But there have been some very good proposals for changing it. For one thing, the commodity subsidies, although they were intended to help those farmers who don't get paid the cost of production by the corporations, it doesn't actually help those family farms. And that's why we're hemorrhaging family farms every year. It ends up supporting the mega farms, because the only way you can survive, even with the subsidies, is by having hundreds of thousands of acres, no joke, like really massive farms. And so it is the very richest farmers who are having millions of dollars in profits every year, who are getting millions of dollars in farm subsidies as well. So we have this horrible economic system. It could be reformed. There is bipartisan support to reform this. For instance, there are many conservative think tanks that are very much opposed to wasting tax dollars, and they go after these subsidies just the same as the economic justice people working on behalf of farmers and farm workers, of course, that's why we have this class of people working in farms who are treated like slave labor, literally, because the farm economy is so very, very depressed. But we can change it. I'm not sure that it'll get changed this year. The Farm Bill comes up once every 5 years. But now's the time to get engaged. The piece of legislation that my group really loves is called the Food and Farm Act. So please, it's by Congressman Blumenauer from Portland, Oregon. So Blumenauer's Food and Farm Act. So please call your congresspeople, your congressperson, and your 2 senators and ask them to support the Food and Farm Act. And every single one of your legislators will be voting on the Farm Bill this year. And so this is something that they will end up voting on. And they will vote on a host of amendments that will be important to people who receive food stamps, to people who care about organic agriculture. There's always a big push to support the good things in the Farm Bill. So if you watch the Farm Bill unfold as it does, there are going to be lots of opportunities to advocate for something good that you really like organic agriculture, making sure that we're fairly allocating food stamps so that we're not, so that people can actually eat off of food stamps.
I'm sorry, who was the senator that you mentioned?
Blumenauer, it's B-L-U-M, Blumen, E-N-A-U-R, Blumenauer from Portland, Oregon, the Food and Farm Act.
Gillibrand is very supportive.
She is awesome.
Speak into the mic.
Yeah.
In New York, Gillibrand is very supportive of these type of legislation.
Yeah, she's the #1 champion for food stamps, and for the conversation now, unfortunately, is how much should we cut food stamps by? We know that we're not giving families enough to eat. Food stamps is so ridiculously minimal, And the Republicans have couched the debate in how much we should cut food stamps by. But Gillibrand is the #1 fighter for that cause. And I'm sure she also supports organic farmers as well. And she's on the Senate Agriculture Committee, so she has power. So she's your #1 person, but also your congressperson you need to reach out to. And ask them to co-sponsor the Bloom and Hour legislation.
And now I'm introducing Erika Freund, whose background is as a social worker. Her job title is Mobile Pantry Startup Manager. She works for Westside Campaign Against Hunger, which is based on West 86th Street. However, she spent her day in the Bronx today at a warehouse, and she's going to tell us what she was doing. Okay?
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me today.
We're very happy you're here.
So first, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about who Westside Campaign Against Hunger is, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about my role there and the work that we're doing in the community. But I would also just start to say, we're actually located, so Westside Campaign Against Hunger is actually located at West 86th Street between Broadway and West End Avenue. So I have business cards, so afterwards if anyone ever wants to come up and volunteer or get a tour of our supermarket style pantry, which I'm going to explain to you what that is in a minute, I'd be happy to connect you or have any of you there for lunch or anything like that. So feel very welcome. So Westside Campaign Against Hunger is one of the largest emergency food pantries in New York City. In New York City alone, there's between 700 and 800 emergency food pantries. Out of those 800 pantries, about 5 of them are what we call super pantries. So I'm going to call Westside Campaign Against Hunger Wiska for the rest of the evening because it's a short how we say it internally. So Wiska is one of the super pantries of New York City. We serve about 10 million families, or 10,000 families a year. We serve people from all 5 boroughs. The history of Wiska is they've been around since 1979. They're located still in the basement of the church that they were founded in. But what makes Wiska one of the super pantries are 2 big things. The first thing is that Wiska actually was the first food pantry in the United States that developed what they call now the customer choice model. So, historically, food insecurity and hunger relief really started from religious institutions, as you all probably know, and people were really handed meal bags or food bags, right, with no choices. So actually the founder of Wiska they were working in a church, they were working with the congregation on this, and she actually saw people like out in the community kind of switching what they had in their bags, and then they surveyed their community and they realized, what we're doing really doesn't have any dignity in it. So that's kind of how it all started. And then what led to that was that she said, you know what, I'm going to rearrange this food pantry like a supermarket. So actually our emergency food pantry is set up, it is a supermarket. It is set up like a supermarket. People shop like you're in a supermarket. So now, 30, 40 years later, most pantries, if not all pantries, are really, they call themselves customer choice models, which allows the customer, and that's a phrase that's really used in hunger relief. A lot of in social services, people use client, but really in hunger relief, people really use the phrase customer. So it's really, most pantries now are set up like a customer choice model. So that's Wiska's claim to fame, pretty much. What happened after that was obviously, we all know that food is really an access point for people in many ways, right? Whether you're challenged in that area or not challenged, food is celebratory. Food is such an access point to so many things for humans, I think. But if
what do you mean by access point?
Say
a few more words.
Sure. So food is an access point. It could be an access point to a social gathering, to a celebration. But in terms of what I mean is it's an access point to maybe other problems in someone's life. Because if somebody is food insecure and they're visiting a food pantry, it probably means that there's probably other things happening in their life, right? They probably have issues with housing, maybe rents are high, maybe they're having, a hard time accessing like appropriate health care, things like that. There could be chronic health conditions. So what Wiska did after they decided to develop this customer choice model was that they also then simultaneously developed a very small social service department. So Wisk is not just a food pantry, right? It's really an access point for people to get services. So what we do there also is we have a really robust SNAP, food stamp enrollment program. We do health insurance really, really well there. And then we have a lot of partners that come in and table and things like that. We also have chair yoga while people are waiting. It's a really incredible organization. We often do a lot of health screening there too. So we're really creating like a huge access point for people to come and get an arrayment of services. So beyond that, a few years after that, 10 years after that, what we also decided was, workforce development is really important. People need jobs. So what we did was we developed a small but comprehensive, robust culinary job training program. So there's 3 cohorts a year that graduate about 25 students, and that might not seem a lot to graduate 75 students, but it actually is because our graduation rates are really high. It's free. It's an incredible program where people go on to get other trainings, or they become health homeaides. People aren't just going on to work in a restaurant. So the reason I'm saying all this, because I can't wait to tell you about our next step of innovation. It's that it's really come like a full service organization, right? It's not just an emergency food pantry. We do a lot of things. So what the latest kind of innovation area that Wiska has developed on is that in the last couple of years, I don't know how familiar everyone is with the amount of money that has been injected into hunger relief in New York City, but it's been a lot. A lot of the super pantries received a lot of money to collaborate, to learn from each other. There's been tons of capacity building going on for those other little 700 food pantries. It's really actually been incredible. So how Wiska approached this opportunity a couple years ago when the financial injection started happening in hunger relief is that we decided that we were going to expand, but instead of just expanding, we were actually going to bring food to people and not make people come to food. And what does that mean, right? So out across the United States and even in New York City, there is tons of different mobile feeding programs, mobile food programs going on. But Westside Campaign Against Hunger is really known for its innovation, and we decided that we were going to create a mobile food pantry like no one has created before. So I'd love to play you a little video and then talk a little bit more about it. This is our warehouse space in Hunts Point. This is where our mobile pantry program lives. Today, we're going to be going to Northern Manhattan Improvement Corps. We're really excited about it. What you're going to see today is you're going to see people shopping for choice. You're going to see people shopping for fresh produce, which really adheres to the Wiska standards.
Most of the people who come to our pantry either are working or want to be working. And life happens, and sometimes they need a hand up, and that's what we do. It's not a handout, it's a hand up. For decades, the Westside Campaign Against Hunger has done a great job of serving people food. We bring people to food, and now we're flipping the model and saying we're going to bring food to people. It's doing something with our community and making sure we're fulfilling their needs, which is for healthy, affordable, great food. I mean, it's really in a pilot phase right now. Like, coming from the restaurant world, what I told Erika is like, this is the same way we open up restaurants. And that's what we've been doing. We've been testing out routes, testing out our partners, working with them, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. The reaction's been quite amazing.
Oh my God, Wisk has been incredible. They're just a great organization to work with, extremely friendly. They've made everything super simple. I've felt like it's a real partnership. But this is something that I know members of our community really need, and we know that in order to start the day right and for people to be engaged in programming, really where they're paying attention and getting something out of programming, they have to be fed.
We need to raise more money to support our community, and we need our community of donors to step up. We're looking at the calendar year of 2018 as a huge year. We cannot simply rely on donated food. In order to distribute the food that we feel is important, we need to buy more dairy. We need to buy more protein, whether it's beans or chicken. we have to spend money on communicating and talking and telling our story, and really just to cover the costs of our staff, which isn't a huge staff for this program, but we obviously need to, in the long term, make sure that we adequately pay our staff and are supporting our volunteers. We need to make good on our promises, which is we're going to bring food to people. I think to me, the thing that I've learned at Wiska is our customers, our staff, our volunteers, our board, our advisory board, everyone has the ability.
That wasn't meant to be a fundraising plug. It was more, I just really wanted to kind of give you a visual kind of about what we do.
Well, I really appreciate seeing a little bit more of what they do, because all I've known all these years that I've been running my CSA is we donate our surplus. In other words, when our members don't pick up their vegetables, which you'd be surprised, they really don't always pick it up. And it's beautiful produce. We would not like to throw it away and waste it. That would be ridiculous. So we have a relationship with Wiska. They come and pick it up for us, which is wonderful for us, because in previous years we were having to bring it to them or another nonprofit. And that's all volunteered labor, and it's really hard at the end of the day, after you volunteered at the CSA, to then bring it someplace. And sometimes we have a lot of surplus. So I've been wondering what happens to it, and that was one of the reasons I invited somebody from Wiska, because I just want to know, what are you doing with our food? You know,
Well,
so we're learning.
Yeah, and I think what's great about that is that actually Wisk is actually what they're also known for is having pretty much the largest selection of fresh produce out of actually any of even the super pantries in all the 5 boroughs. So we're really known for our fresh produce because of all the great relationships we have with CSAs and City Harvest and all the, just like the local restaurants and things like that too. The mobile pantry program obviously is just out of pilot phase, and we actually work in partnership with 15 organizations like in the South Bronx and Northern Manhattan and all the way up to Fordham. So what we do is we actually bring the customer choice model to the organizations. So we're serving everywhere from 150 to 200 people Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We're on the road. It's incredible to be able to bring like the Wiska service, like a mobile program to these organizations. People are actually like not having to travel, so we're able to serve more seniors with mobility issues and whatnot. And we've just, it's just been massively successful in the last 4 months. And the program runs out of Hunts Point in the Bronx. I opened a warehouse up there about 6 months ago. And what's been really the next kind of step of innovation for us now is that, I don't know if all of you are familiar with Hunts Point Market Food Cooperative, but I just built out a mini food rescue plan. So I've been able to completely reduce the money that I spend on fresh produce. Wow. And so we've reduced the money because, as we're a small nonprofit, right? So our food costs and our staff costs are the highest. So in order to eliminate our produce budget allows us to do like a lot more. And there's billions of dollars, of people making money off produce in the Hunts Point cooperative market. So the fact that we've been able to solidify our partnerships, secure rescue food, all produce, good quality, and we're able to get it right back out into the communities that we serve.
So you just used a term, rescued food. Not everybody necessarily knows what that means, so why don't you just explain that briefly? Yeah.
I think it pretty much means exactly what it says.
Right.
It means maybe food that would be going to waste, bringing it somewhere else for good use if you have the capacity. I don't know if I'm doing a good job explaining it.
Yeah.
But and actually the food that we're rescuing, I should say, it's actually food, it wouldn't necessarily go to waste right there, right? I mean, I just got 2,000 pounds of cantaloupe today from the warehouse, 1,000 pounds of mushrooms, 2,000 pounds of green beans. I mean, it was actually like, I'm a little disheveled today because I was in a warehouse for 7 hours, really going through produce and repackaging it. So we're actually getting like really good produce. So it's been really incredible for our organization to expand so rapidly in such like a short amount of time.
So it's really gratifying to know that we're running a CSA which is supporting a local farmer that we know for 7 years, and we know that they're honorable and they're not spraying pesticides on our produce, and we're helping them, and they are bringing the food to us, and we are enjoying it, and we're not throwing it out when we don't use it all. We're giving it to Wiska, and Wiska is distributing it to people who need it. So it's a very gratifying thing if you think about the whole process. And partly I wanted to do this event just to really visualize the whole process, which is that's what I wanted to get out of it, because we've been giving our surplus to them for a while, and I never knew what they were doing with it. I mean, I assumed they were doing good things with it, but I just wanted to understand it better. Okay, so thank you. Did you have more than? Okay, so this is Sharon Kimmelman.
I grew up in New York City. Our apartment had a southeastern exposure. We had sun all day, 5 or 6 different plants, so we just had a nice jungle there. Also, I remember in grade school, actually I thought about this because I purchased seeds for our school. We tried to purchase seeds from the Hudson Valley, which is our area, in order to have the best, to support a local business, number one, and number two, because plants that are grown in our area have seeds developed within them that are more adaptable to our climate. So it's something to consider if you have a garden or you're choosing to sprout or grow something. So in my early years in grammar school, we had the option of buying flower seeds, packets of flower seeds, and they were 1 and 2 pennies each. This is a long time ago, and they came from the Botanic Gardens in Brooklyn, I believe, and maybe from the Bronx, I'm not sure. But those were happy days, and I planted many window box. I've been a community gardener for decades, and when it wasn't popular, and when land was still quite available, and neighborhoods were run down, and real estate interests were not interested because the neighborhoods hadn't yet come together, and neighborhoods come together around community gardens. And often after the neighborhood really settles and people are civil to one another and helpful, and they begin to communicate well and form other groups and notice their similar interests, that's when there's a land grab. And then the community gardens go by the wayside for the most part. So the community garden on 89th Street between Columbus and Amsterdam has been there about 45 years. So it was established in the 70s before the city was protecting them.
How many of you are aware of that garden?
It's the Westside Community Garden.
Okay,
And,
good.
They do a big tulip planting in November in order for the blooms to happen in May. But before that, it was quite an anchor in the community. So I took over the children's program there in 2002, I think, after being a member many years. And I developed it more broadly and deeply because my background as a teacher, I wanted something I enjoy and I wanted to impart. But more than gardening, which was my point, there are principles of life that get communicated in these types of programs. And I've noticed that with education, children, there's a lot dropped out. There's a lot of pressure on achieving and scoring and kind of academics that don't have no heart or don't have enough heart, and what's left out is the teamwork, although words are used for students to develop skills in teamwork, cooperation, and so on, they don't really have enough experience at it. And there's, I think, no better place than the garden to really send those messages home without even having to talk about it, because it requires teamwork and cooperation, and because nature does that anyway. So they're watching it in action. They're watching how plants intertwine with one another, and they're making decisions about where to put things because of the way plants are described. We're looking at seeds which are tiny. Plants are going to get large, and they have to think in advance and not problem solve necessarily, but think ahead. And be patient, and aspects that they need of their character are drawn out from within. The word education means to draw out the wisdom from within. And I think in a garden it happens beautifully. You don't have to tell them what to do. They touch and they see. Sometimes it requires having them slow down enough to do that. But afterwards they realize when they go out into the garden that you can almost see a shift in their demeanor. So I grew up with phrases like a farmer uses everything from the pig, everything except the squeal, which indicates a very thrifty and thoughtful and conservationist mindset, that you waste nothing. From our native cultures, we learn that as well. Another little ditty is use it up, wear it out. Use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. And this is the antithesis of what's going on in our cultures today. I'm often in school after the kids go home and the custodian comes by and sweeps up everything that's fallen down, pencils, erasers, new books, and it all goes into the trash. And because they're not allowed to pick up anything, that they would be considered not doing their job. So I'm trying to infuse the life lessons, and it just so happens that it's in a gardening venue, so I'm happy. I'm happy about that. Of course, waste not, want not. I think we've all heard about that. The name of the program that I've developed in the school is called Urban Roots, and let your roots go deep and broad. And so the students learn from kindergarten through 4th grade about gardening and about nature. And each grade has a different focus in math and science and in the other subjects. And so I geared the lessons of nature and of gardening to that grade level. But they all know that, and I'm so glad that you talked about living soil, because it's not just dead rocks, it's not just clay and sand, but what all the children know is that we feed the soil feeds the plant. So when we're watering or we're putting things on the soil, we're not feeding the plants. We don't know what to do with the plants, but the soil does. So we feed the soil and the soil feeds the plants, but the plants also feed the soil because they exude substances from their root systems that feed the microorganisms in the soil. And then, of course, the plants feed us. And then it starts again, but really it isn't again because it's a cycle. And these things go on all the time together. So the lesson is what you do comes back like a boomerang. There's no end to your interaction with nature. So they have begun to develop a real heartfelt responsibility for their garden and for the neighborhood, and they have changed. I've seen over the years, having been there long enough now, to see that cycle go through. So K through 4 is gardening, and a couple of years ago we realized that the oldest students in the school were going to go off to middle school and then take care of themselves more or less. And they knew how to garden, but they didn't quite know how to eat or feed themselves. And so I developed a program called Root Camp, where it's a food awareness program for students going off to middle school, where they have to take care of themselves. And so they're learning more about, not necessarily how to cook, but really about food principles, about the necessity for balancing food and noticing your hunger and taking care of yourself. I see a lot of young people who are not taking care of themselves. I don't think they're being coached to doing that. And so there's food for them to taste, there's lessons to learn. In a particular lesson, there are 10 throughout the year, and they then, they learn a lesson, they taste food that I've prepared, or they'll prepare it themselves and taste it, or they will take home, they'll prepare some food to take home. There's a recipe with each lesson, which is really simple. I have them ask someone at home to teach them about the tools in the kitchen cabinet. Find the person in their families who can cook. they take a questionnaire in the first lesson and the same one at the last lesson, the 10th lesson. What do you make for breakfast? Can you prepare this? How many times a week do you set the table? Who does the cleanup in your house? Do you know how to wash dishes? These kinds of things. And I ask them each time what they're doing, and they are doing more. And it's somewhat hopeful. This program, Root Camp, was funded by an organization called Ample Table for Everyone, ATE. And the handbook that I wrote and teach from is online somewhere. I don't know exactly where it is, but it's up there. So in the lessons that I teach in the garden, of course there's some shop talk about the different tools and the seeds and where the seeds are, and that fruits have seeds and vegetables. The edible part of the vegetable generally doesn't have a seed, so anything with a fruit, anything with a seed is considered a fruit. But more than that, it's really the approaches to what I'm doing there that I think is really the lesson. We see that I think there are about 700 gardens in the city. I think that was the figure that I got. And I also got another figure that 50% of New York City schools have gardens. I was astounded by that. I think it's maybe more than 50%. And that was on a website called Inhabit, INHABIT. It was probably .org. There's an article on how the Department of Education is now allowing for this. Before the 50s, there was an education-based curriculum. There was an agriculture-based curriculum. And after the 50s, it became a technological-based curriculum. And it looks like they are going back and probably doing a meld between the two. So in our solutions to problems, I'm interested more in an approach. So if our approach uses more energy than it saves, it's not a very good solution. And we see this with the problems we've created. So another question to ask is, does it benefit your neighbors as well as yourself? Another question is it improving your surroundings and your environment? Does your solution align with the sound ecological principles of nature? So there can be some quick fixes, but your quick fix might end you in a more hot soup, a worse situation than you find yourself. So we need to, I think, we need to look at the synergistic effects of our actions. We need to speak more to the people who we're working with, and we might find out that we've got some blind spots and brighten them up somewhat. Let's see. I did want to mention that another thing that I noticed online is there was a survey on what green spaces made available to the community and to the schools. So they are, the garden spaces can be teaching tools, and they can be hands-on labs for math and science, but you can also teach poetry and drawing and literature in gardens as well. They're arenas for social and emotional growth, and often children who have a difficult time sitting in classrooms, a lot of emphasis on sitting. Teachers report that when they're just out, they will stop fidgeting and stop being so active maybe after a first few minutes, because the constraint of the seat under the desk in a cluster in a closed classroom, often overheated, just doesn't add to their ability to learn. And it's generally a restorative environment both for children and staff. You've probably heard of the 6 R's. No, the 3 R's. I added 3 more. The 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. So we have a circle in our garden. It's refuse, then reduce, reuse, repair, redistribute, and then recycle. because the recycling aspects require a tremendous amount of energy. I don't think we see that part. But to melt down all those plastic bottles, and it takes a tremendous amount of energy. So it's something to consider of how to back out of that, not solve it once you get to the end of the road. I have developed a couple of teaching tools. I have a game that I am looking to produce. If any of you has any interest in assisting me with crowdfunding or locating sources for this kind of thing, I'd love to hear from you. I have a flyer here on tree care for street trees. Last month, I wrote up a choose your path and take action. There's a lot of suggestions here on how to improve your life, taking care of your local environment, your farmers, your food resources, and so on. I did want to mention when we were talking about composting, you can organize your building to have the city pick up your compost. It's called curbside collection, and that's getting more and more popular as people are realizing why it's important to extract the organic wastes and put them in the best place possible, which is back in the ground.
So how can people find out about that part?
I think you can go onto the city website. Is it Grow NYC that's got
I think
that?
so. And they pick it up 3 times a week, which is tremendous.
So if you've seen those brown bins with the locking lids,
You have to apply for it.
My neighbor set it all up.
That's great. Yeah, someone needs to organize the building, or a group of you, which
9 apartments or more.
Oh, that's helpful information, because I was thinking about how to spread the word in my building, which is not an engageable building easily, but 9 is not so bad.
The building management has to agree to it, and they come to your location and check it out. And what's interesting about it is that that program takes meat and bones.
Yeah.
Because it's not all used for compost, it's also being used for energy production.
But that's not the same as the compost stations at the farmers
No,
markets,
it's
right?
no, it's
Because
different.
there you're not supposed to bring meat
This
and
is very
bones.
unusual that they can take meat and bones and fat.
Fats, yeah.
I have a friend at Grow NYC, and I believe she told me that it will be citywide. I have a friend at Grow NYC, and I believe she told me that the plan is to have the curbside compost available to the whole city soon. So I think it's coming neighborhood by neighborhood. It's not where I am yet.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that they could organize that much, because there's not that much of it going on yet, but they're planning to put more resources into making it happen. Great.
Thank you. Come closer, because I can't, the cord doesn't go to that. I don't have anything to say. I mean, they did it, I heard that when they initially started, it was to reduce the wet garbage in the New York City garbage. That's how it all started, so we could start doing dry, recycle, and wet. So, because you see those garbage trucks and the trailer.
I have a question.
Is there anybody here in the room who's a master composter, who knows how to, oh yeah, Sharon. So maybe you can talk about how to compost, maybe, we all have little tree plots in front of our buildings. I wonder if we could use those tree plots to do some composting and build soil.
I don't think
Not
so.
there, no.
I don't think so, because of the vermin problem. I don't think that would be acceptable in the neighborhood.
Okay, so it has to be off-site.
I've got one for you. When I was living in Washington, D.C., without any green space in my apartment, I did worm composting in my kitchen closet.
Me too. Under my kitchen table.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
It's
very
complicated. If you try to compost tropical fruits, you'll get a little bit of a fruit fly problem, but it can be done, and it's really fun.
Okay.
Yeah, I've set up worm bins with the first grade classes. I meant to bring like the world's
Speak into the
smallest worm bin. I have a little tiny container which I carry around sometimes. I got the idea from somebody else, but it isn't difficult, and there are some solutions for flies that end up there because it's a community inside. Only the worms don't live there. There's a whole collection of critters.
So why are worms important?
Why are worms important?
Like, why do you carry them around with you sometimes, and why did you have composting and then in the closet? Like, what's that all about?
Well, if you can imagine,
A lot of us don't have any idea, probably. At least I don't.
We live in a temperate climate, and we have deciduous trees, and if you can imagine that the tree leaves fall every year, and if they didn't decompose, we would have been buried in leaves long ago. So worms are the major decomposers.
I have a friend who lives out in Queens, and I'm wondering about the laws out there when they do have places for outside gardens and stuff like that. They are not allowed to grow anything that is edible. Now I know if you go back to the 40s and everything like that, it was really kind of like mandatory. You know, you didn't have lawns back then. You grew, and especially you grew food, and that was especially good during the war. And then the lawn became the whole idea of, look how posh we are now. We're beyond that. We don't need to have a garden. I mean, this is a little history, but she told me that at least there in Queens, and I don't know if it's here in Manhattan, that you cannot really have a garden outside that has for food.
Oh, I don't. I've seen many gardens. Yeah. There are. I think it's.
That's what she told me.
There are more languages spoken in
Queens
than anywhere else in the world, and so all of the ethnic groups, people who come from land-based communities, bring their culture with them and their plants. And I've seen numerous plants. Now, sometimes there's a warning because if there are heavy metals and other toxins in the soil, they warn people against just growing without checking the soil quality first. I did want to mention something about worms before we get away from that. Worms are from tropical environments. The red wigglers that we have in our worm bins are not native to this area, and you are not supposed to. If you don't want to do it anymore, you need to leave them local, not to bring them out to a forest, because they will do their work in the forest if they survive the cold, which sometimes they do, and they decompose too much in the forest and will destabilize the ecosystem because they're not native.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I just want to give the mic for a moment to Kevin. Kevin, as I said in the beginning, is a farmer. Where's your farm? Where do you farm?
I was farming in Staten Island last season, and I'm putting together a new project this season.
Okay.
You had an idea about fruit trees and nut trees in Manhattan, New York City.
Oh yeah, just that the city, we ought to, if people want to get involved in something, maybe they can encourage the city to plant more food-producing trees, because they still don't do that, and some cities do now. And the city has a huge tree budget, and they're planting a lot of trees, and they could plant some nice chestnuts and fruit trees and hazelnuts, and there could be a lot of food out there that people could harvest. But really what I wanted to say, I didn't want to be a contrarian and farm mansplain something, but the story we tell about farmers and loss of farmland and all that, I've been identifying with regenerative farming for a long time, advocating for it, and I was really pleased to see Regeneration International be born, and Vonda and Nashiv on board and everything. But anyway, in the Northeast right now, farms are increasing considerably and have been for a long time. New farmers are increasing, the age is younger, many more of them are women, or maybe other genders, but not men. And it's a real thing, and I think we ought to tell that story. And I'm not sure what the advantages of telling the story about this sad story about farmers, because it's not exactly what's happening, because those farmers that are adapting to the new conditions and adapting to the new direct marketing conditions and adapting and going organic are doing very well. And we want to support them, and we want to tell this story, I think, in an accurate way. Sometimes I don't know if I really agree with all the data coming out of organic consumers all the time. I know I'm in the permaculture world. I'm a permaculture preacher, so
How many else is in permaculture?
I'm familiar with fuzzy data to make a point. And I don't know if I'm always
I take my sources whenever possible. I take my sources directly from the U.S. government, and so
I appreciate that.
we can go back to that
appreciate your
slide.
footnotes. So I'm not, that point is irrelevant,
Some sectors, like some sectors of the farm economy are starting to grow. The overall loss of farms and farmers is accurate, but in some parts of the country, in some sectors, where farmers have a direct market and when they can sell directly to their customers and get paid what it costs to produce them, that is working.
And that might be a helpful story if we want to like talk to consumers, because what can they do when they're like, the information that like, oh, this terrible thing is happening, there's nothing a consumer can do about that. Mm-hmm. But they can do something more. And also locally, I think we ought to tell a more nuanced story. There's plenty of local farmers using a lot of plastic, burning up the soil, not doing anything because they can make a lot of money, right? So, you know, and advocating, of course, for grass-based and pasture-fed, because the dairy industry and the plastic explosion in the world of haylage and baleage and silage, and the whole way that's changed the dairy and the meat industries. Like there's some nuanced things, and I think if consumers wanna, you know, I don't know. I don't even really like the whole thing of like identifying as a consumer actually having any power at all whatsoever. We're something other than consumers, right? But at the very least, if somebody wants to consume ethically, then full empowerment would be full knowledge. And I know it's complicated, but nobody said it was going to be easy, right? We're in a massive predicament, an accelerating mass extinction, right? It's not going to go away. This is as serious as it gets. And encouraging people to see that there's not very many tools in the toolbox that will actually have any effect, but putting it back in the dirt might. So I think we got to tell this story. We got to tell it hard because it's for real. You're not going to sequester it in electric cars or robots or bitcoins, which are also just burning up the planet to make imaginary crap, you know, and right, because the carbon footprint of every bitcoin, right, with these servers grinding away. Talk about fake wealth, right? Just the contrary of real wealth. Anyway, I gotta stop rambling. But anyway, yeah, regenerative farming, putting it back in the dirt. We don't have a lot of other tools in the toolbox. Encourage everybody to really drill deeply into that and try to buy from local farms that are doing no-till and that are doing grass-based, right? That's where it's at.
I have a little positive note about consumers. Over the past 15 years, and this involves Lexis, we wanted to label GMO once we kind of survived from September 11th in 2001. We started doing protests in DC, all around. In the government, there were politicians saying in 2007, 6, particularly in 2007, there's a particular instance where they said, we're going to label GMO for you people. Well, you know what? It was the people. Nobody ever made any laws about labeling GMO. It was all those protests with all the people, consumers. I went to a lot of them with organic consumers, met Alexis and thousands of other people, protesting, label GMO, label GMO. You know what? Everybody labels GMO, even if there's no a shot in hell that it'll be a GMO in there. But it's a marketing tool now. But we are labeling GMO because of the people, and you were a part of that whole movement. That's how I got involved in the whole thing. We protested, and the people did it. So that's a positive note about the people, but I get what you're saying about consumers have little...
They didn't pass the law.
But that's a positive.
They didn't pass the law.
Yeah,
They never passed a law. But we, the
They did
people...
pass a law. It wasn't the law that we
Did they pass a
wanted.
law? Okay, but long before that, we started putting it. I worked for a manufacturer at the time, and I said, okay, we got to put no BPA, no bisphenol A in this plastic bottle, and no GMOs. That was in 2007, and nobody knew what we're talking about. But now everybody knows what we're talking about.
I appreciate that. That's a good.
That's a positive, but you're right about that.
They're putting it on there for not because it's the law, but because it's a market.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. We were more successful in the marketplace than we were through legislation. The legislation that Congress ended up passing has not been implemented. It probably won't ever be implemented. And if it were implemented, it would be voluntary, and it wouldn't require words on the package. You could actually just put a QR code on the package that didn't have any indication that it would be about GMOs. and the consumer would be responsible for figuring out that little black and white checkered symbol might give you information about GMOs. You'd have to scan it with your phone and then go through a website. So hopefully this legislation that was passed by Congress will die in the regulatory phase, and we can start fresh and go back to the states that were actually requiring words on the package, because there was a moment in time between Vermont's law being implemented and Congress preempting that law that you did see on every can of Pepsi, partially produced with genetic engineering, and every other junk food that includes something made with corn or sugar beets or all the other genetically modified ingredients. So we had a brief moment where we won through legislation at the state level, but I think you're right that we have one in the marketplace because it's a marketing ploy that everybody loves, and now we have to, our challenge is to expand on that desire. So the motto for the organic movement since then has been organic, non-GMO, and so much more, because there's a lot more to the food system that we want than just being non-GMO. But I think it was an interesting time, and we did develop a bit of understanding of our food system through that campaign.
Say your name, please.
My name's Adam, and I have a question for Alexis. I wanted to know what exactly is being done right now to subsidize meat production, and how can we shift that from a political and government means to subsidize farmers who are doing regenerative farming and carbon farming?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, I point you to Blue Hour's Food and Farm Act. And the most wonderful thing about that law says that we're not going to allow factory farms to access the Environmental Qualities Incentive Program. So it sounds like environmental quality incentives, that sounds like it would benefit farmers who benefit the environment. But actually that subsidy has been used primarily by factory farms to deal with the horrible waste problem that they create. They have huge cesspools of waste coming out of their factories, and it's leaching into the groundwater, and it's running off of their farm whenever it rains, and it's an environmental nightmare. You know, we should require the factory farms to clean it up, but instead of doing that, we paid for them to, you know, contain it a little better. So the Food and Farm Act would cut off that type of subsidy to factory farms. The other big subsidy that the factory farms get is the cheap cost of grain. And as I mentioned, it's companies like Tyson as well as Cargill that have an incentive in having the lowest possible price paid to the farmer, and subsidies that keep that bad economic system in place. So it's the grain subsidies, because all the grain is going into the factory farms. But the Blumenauer bill takes care of it all, and the Blumenauer bill says that we're going to specifically give our environmental subsidies to farmers who are pasture raising animals and showing that the way that they're pasturing the animals is sequestering carbon in the soil. So that bill is really a great bill, and I think you'll enjoy reading it. You'll see a lot that you like in it. Should immediately ask your members of Congress to co-sponsor the bill.
Could everybody who's interested in helping with this just make a note of the Blumenauer bill, and contact your Congress members.
And
House of Representatives.
yes, and then your two senators as well.
And your two senators.
Especially Senator Gillibrand, because she's on the Agriculture Committee. She may be introducing her own model legislation, and you know, Congressman Blumenauer, who's not on an Agriculture Committee, he doesn't really rank very high compared to Senator Gillibrand, but it's worth mentioning it to her, respectfully saying that there are some aspects of this that I think are really, really important. I hope that you incorporate that into the work that you do on the Ag Committee this year. But you know what I would love more than anything else is to help you all set up meetings with your congressional staff persons in their district offices. I would love to do that. I'll schedule the meeting for you if you agree to show up. I will come to New York to join you for the meeting. I will brief you on how to explain the bill to the staff people. And of course, if you ever wanted to come to DC, we could do that as well. So if you got my email earlier, alexis@organicconsumers.org, that's my favorite thing to do, is to connect people with their legislators.
But I just wanted to take a moment to thank our speakers and Joe Friendly again. I'd like to invite any of you to speak to me about ideas you have for future events, or speakers, or films. We're interested in knowing.